for the final award of the day to Reverend Reginald L. Bacchus of the 400 Foundation, please welcome Richard Roberts and Board Vice Chair, Bronx Pro's Samantha Magistro.
That last project is very exciting, particularly for the parents in the room, because now your kids can stay in your basement. CHPC will figure out a way to make that happen.
Not my kid.
Not your kid, huh? Your kid's going? No. Gotta go? All right. Our keynote speaker today is the Reverend Reginald Bacchus, an activist and a preacher, and I just recently found out a law student. He co-founded the 400 Foundation, a coalition of faith leaders that have come together to advocate for opportunities for communities of color in the real estate and construction industries.
For more than a decade, CHPC has been doing research on the impact of prevailing wage on affordable housing. At CHPC, we believe in the facts. That is why CHPC launched a prevailing wage data portal to help educate policymakers on the costs, the benefits, and the trade-offs of prevailing wage. We look at the data to reveal who prevailing wage actually will help, what it will actually cost, and at whose expense. And on a personal note, many of us in affordable housing business are driven by our faith and lead by our values. And so I'm especially pleased to present Reverend Bacchus with CHPC's Insight Award this year.
Through his work at the 400 Foundation, Reverend Bacchus is asking the question, are prevailing wages good for minority communities? And how can we really help these communities move forward in the affordable housing and construction industries? And without further ado, please help me welcome to the stage the Reverend Reginald L. Bacchus.
Good afternoon. I won't allow my feelings to be hurt because I didn't get a fancy video, I guess. But it is indeed a joy to be here to share. As a keynote speaker, they told me I have about five to 7 minutes. I am representing Harlem and Uptown, so I will not do Showtime, but I'll give you the equivalent of a 125th to 59th Street if anybody's ever rode the A train. It is a joy to be here. Just want to recognize my colleagues who are largely responsible. I'm just the poster child, I guess, of this movement, the 400 Foundation. To my co-founders, the Reverend Dr. Kali Mutu of Emmanuel AME Church in Harlem, Reverend Clinton Miller of Brown Memorial Baptist Church, Brother Kenneth Solomon, Reverend Joseph Holland. My assemblywoman is here, Inez Dickens, the Honorable Assemblywoman Inez Dickens and Londell Davis. My beautiful bride is here, Brittany Bacchus. Stand up, Brittany, and wave. So if you say anything bad about my speech, don't say it in front of her. She takes it personally. And then certainly two of my best friends are here, Marcy and Johannes Cleary, both dear friends and members of Abyssinian. Also, Dr. Butts, Calvin O. Butts III, who's the senior pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church, due to his responsibilities at SUNY Old Westbury, was not able to be here with us to share. But the chairman of our deacon board, Deacon Gerald Barber, chairman of the Abyssinian Baptist Church, is here as well. It's an honor to be here again alongside such incredible awardees, Joseph Rose, Sister Leela Bolzert, Marcy Kesner, and City Community Capital. So I imagine it was a cold day on February 26, 1937, as the headlines displayed that citizens organized to aid slum fight. Realty, building, labor, tenant, and civic groups joined together in a move to spur low-rent housing, the first cooperative plan. And I say it was a cold day because I imagine in New York City history, they said it'd be a cold day in hell before this many people got together to work on a collective issue. We know something happens when there are cold days in hell, right? In 2008, there was a man by the name of Barack Hussein Obama who was elected as the first black president of the United States of America. They said it would be a cold day in hell. The 400 Foundation was started on the memorial weekend of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And we were founded with a mission. I want to go into that mission, but by a show of hands, how many of us have ever put a puzzle together? Anybody ever put a puzzle together? All right, a few people in the room so you can share in this analogy. I want to give us a thought if I had to guide this conversation. Puzzles, pipelines, and pathways. Puzzles, pipelines, and pathways. One of the great joys of putting a puzzle together is that you have disparate pieces of different colors, different shapes, and different sizes. When they all come together, they paint a beautiful mosaic, a sublime picture that we all marvel at. But something interesting happens when you have not all of the pieces of the puzzle together. It's only when you have all of the pieces that the full picture can be shown, and you are the beneficiary of the beauty of what the Creator intended to design. And I would suggest the foundation of our start is because the puzzle that has made up affordable housing and a lot of the economic justice issues in the city of New York far too long has been missing key pieces. So the picture is there, but we're missing key pieces. We believe that the 400 Foundation started, for any preacher, you know, we have to have a biblical text. Genesis 15:13. Genesis 15:13. It says that God told Abram that your children will be oppressed in Egypt for 400 years. We know in Exodus chapter 2 and 3 that God sent Moses down to Pharaoh to say, let my people go. From the biblical standpoint, from the historical standpoint, Jamestown, Virginia, 1619, the first slave ship landed. And here we are in 2019, 400 years later. You look at the biblical precedent of the Exodus narrative and story, 400 years since the first slave ship landed in Jamestown, Virginia. The 400 Foundation was designed as a moral movement with an economic agenda. Our starting on the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not by accident. We are always reminded that he was not just assassinated, but he was murdered, not just for civil rights, but for economic rights. And as we grapple with that reality, we came together as clergy and as people of faith and looked at the unique nature of this moment and this opportunity. I know there are a lot of deal makers in the room, and the key to a deal is recognizing the opportunity and seizing the moment. Let me paint the picture for you, if I will. For the first time in 40 years, we have a Democratic-controlled Senate and Assembly. The top three legislators are very familiar with the unique experience of the African American in New York State. We think of Speaker Hasty, Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins, the Majority Leader of the Assembly, Crystal Peoples-Stokes. So for the first time, we have a Democratic majority in 40 years, three people who are sensitive to the plight of African Americans, and you have a growing concern with the rising tide of frustration that is spilling over into our streets. One of the greatest challenges that we lack is the access to capital and to resources. So we began to come together and put our heads together to say, how can we formulate a mission, a plan, and an organization? When you think about it, the church is still one of the largest landowners in the state of New York and across this nation. Many churches have development projects that are focused on affordable housing. We did not have organizations that brought us together to have a clearinghouse, to have conversations, to ask how we can advance an agenda. The backdrop, when we look at the industry of construction, construction is one of the most valuable access points to the middle class for African American and Latino men and women. The construction industry is one of the only industries where you can have a high school diploma and a criminal record and make $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. There's no other blue-collar industry that allows you to do that. So when we start listening to the political conversations around the legalization of marijuana, it became imperative that we set up not pipelines, but pathways. We've all heard too many times of the prison to poverty and prison to school, the school to prison and school to poverty pipelines. And we are in an age of disruption. So our organization was founded to disrupt that pipeline by creating pathways to success. How do we plan on doing that? Think about what happens when recreational marijuana is legalized. You have the decriminalization that must necessarily happen as men and women come home from Rikers, men and women come home from upstate. because of the Rockefeller drug laws. And then you have populations in urban communities that do not have access to viable means for their economic prosperity and participation. So we decided that we needed to put together a pipeline that ensured when men and women came home, but not only when they came home, for the existing populations in our neighborhoods, they had access to construction jobs. Articles have come out recently that many of our public schools produce students that spend the first 2 years in remedial education before they get to their core curriculum or even core coursework in their pursuit of higher education. So we recognize the moment and the opportunity. We also look at the radicalized nature of our political discourse. We have become so fragmented from one side or the other that we have missed the balance, missed that middle ground in between. God created us all with 2 legs so that we may have balance. And our political discourse has left us in the absence of balance. The economic situation, we are in the midst of one of the greatest housing and construction booms in New York City history. To borrow from Solange Knowles, maybe you know who she is, better known as the sister of Beyonce. She has a song called Cranes in the Sky. We sent our members and we looked at the opportunities of construction sites. We saw time and time again that too many minorities, too many people of color were not fully participating in the construction industry. The majority were the ones who were just standing there holding flags and street signs. We said that after 400 years of exclusion, that the time is here and the time is now to do something. We've been able to pull together over 60 pastors, leaders representing over 500 churches across the state of New York, focused again on an economic agenda. How we began to get engaged in the prevailing wage conversation through the research of CHPC and other articles of those in the industry experts who began to speak to the situation. There were a couple of things that we thought were detrimental to our communities. First, the issue was made the constitutional argument, that when the Constitution was formed, it did not consider that public works would be expanded to private projects because they received subsidies and tax abatements. And it was our argument that when the Constitution was formed, African Americans were 3/5 of a person. The Constitution was formed, the 14th Amendment that advocated and pushed for civil rights was not there. So our concern is without legislated and documented programs to ensure participation in the construction and labor industries, how will we ensure that this is not just another form of publicly funded discrimination? Local 14, which boasts 1,200 members, only has 100 members who are non-white. In a day and age when our labor and construction unions tout their 90% participation of minorities, if you notice, it's just at the apprenticeship level, and we do not see full access at the journeyman level where the full benefits are experienced. So we had to address the constitutional argument. We also had to address open shop. If 100% of our construction workers in New York City were employed by the unions, this would be no problem. But the reality is, of the 100,000 or so, 75% of open shop laborers are minorities and women. So what happens with the expansion of prevailing wage from public projects to private projects? What happens to those jobs? What happens to the pathway to the middle class? What happens to the pathway to being able to provide for your family and have the decency and have the self-respect and to have the sense of dignity that comes with earning a living wage, not just a minimum wage, but a living wage, a livable wage? Then we also were concerned about the impact of prevailing wage to minority business enterprises. If the cost goes up by 30%, there are barriers that prevent full participation from minorities in the real estate development and construction industries. One of the greatest barriers is the lack of access to capital. To even bid for a project, many times you have to show $1 million of capital reserves. But for small and emerging businesses, that is extremely difficult to have the capital that you need to participate at that level. Imagine the devastating impact to MBEs if that capital requirement now is increased by 30%. One of the other great barriers to minority participation is the issue of bonding and insurance. If construction costs go up by 30%, it will have a direct impact on the bonding requirements, causing 30% more capital. And again, another exclusionary principle and barrier that prohibits our participation. But then also the technical assistance that is needed. ADP and Paycom and other payroll processing businesses only process prevailing wage paperwork if you have over 50 employees. When we did a survey, most of our MBEs did not reach the threshold of 50 employees. So again, an additional cost, an additional expense that pushes us out of the industry and precludes us from participation in this economic boom. But then also the issue of affordable housing, which is germane to CHPC and the work that they do. With the price tag of $7.1 billion, 74,000 units of affordable housing, vulnerable or at risk, it is our belief as faith communities that this will be the nail in the coffin for gentrification. 184,000 families impacted. And the question is who benefits and who participates from prevailing wage. Gentrification has ravaged many of our communities. And if we had men and women participating in the construction industry making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 gentrification, the impact would not be as devastating. In the midst of one of the greatest times of displacement in New York City for housing for seniors, where men and women do not have access to the capital to participate, it is imperative that we band together and come together to say if prevailing wage goes through, there needs to be common sense consideration that includes those who have been missing from the puzzle of real estate construction and development, the minority communities who are directly impacted. As we move forward, the mission of 400, we are not a single issue organization. We're greatly concerned with real estate development and construction, simply because these are permanent economies, one of the economic engines of New York City. And with African Americans and Latinos making up over 5 million people in the city of New York, it's time for participation. And we're here to advocate. We're not chasing. When a young man or a young woman is shot down in the streets, we believe in proactive responses. The shame on Staten Island with Eric Gardner was not just that he was killed, but that a 41-year-old man had to sell Lucy cigarettes. Speaks to the economic disparity, the lack of access and participation that faces our communities. So as we focus on moving forward, we invite you to partner with us, to make a difference. We invite you to seize this moment, to do what many minority businesses have done. Meredith Marshall, who's a friend and member of our church, he received his award. He told me he spoke for 18 minutes. I promised him I wouldn't speak for 18 minutes. I see Dewana Williams of DeBar Development, who is here. There are so many here, but what we lack is access to capital and opportunity. There is no shortage of ideas. There is no shortage of deals, but what we lack is access to capital. So that's what we're here for. The 400 Foundation will be active and around fighting, looking to the policy research of CHPC to try to do our part to make a difference. So when the history is written and the final story is told, I hope that you will join us and partner and leave a lasting legacy. Because what really matters at the end of the day is what people say about you, the impact that you've made. So partner with communities of color, partner with organizations, with developers, so that we may say that indeed our city is picture perfect and not a picture missing key and vital puzzle pieces. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful afternoon.